I thought I had everything. The perfect husband, the perfect life. Until our 10th anniversary, when I found James and my cousin Vanessa locked in a passionate kiss at our favorite restaurant. The restaurant where I had planned his surprise party. 2 years they had been sneaking around behind my back. 2 years of lies while he took my love, my trust, and even my inheritance money. Everyone knew except me. When I confronted him, he simply smiled and said Vanessa was his soulmate. He asked for a divorce the same night, calling me crazy when I broke down. I lost everything that night, including my life in a terrible car crash. But fate wasn't finished with me. I was reborn 7 years in the past with all my memories intact. This time, I won't be the victim. This time, I'll build my empire while he watches, powerless to stop me. Eliza hummed softly as she arranged the fresh tulips in the crystal vase, her husband's favorite flowers. 10 years of marriage deserved something special, something that would make James remember why he fell in love with her a decade ago. The anniversary dinner she had planned at Luciel, the exclusive restaurant where he had proposed, was just the beginning. She had coordinated with the staff to have his favorite dessert prepared, hired a string quartet to play their wedding song, and invited their closest friends to surprise him. "Perfect," she whispered, stepping back to admire the bouquet. Just like their marriage, she thought. Perfect. The clock on the mantel chimed 5, reminding her that she had only 2 hours before the reservation. Eliza hurried to the bedroom to prepare, passing by the framed wedding photo hanging in the hallway. They looked so young, so hopeful. James with his brilliant smile and confident stance, her with eyes that sparkled with dreams of their future together. Her phone buzzed with a text as she stepped into the shower. Probably James, letting her know he was running late again, the 3rd time this week. She ignored the slight twinge of annoyance. He worked hard to provide for them, to build his real estate development company into something remarkable. A few late nights were a small price to pay for their beautiful life. After her shower, wrapped in her plush robe, Eliza checked her phone. Not James, but her best friend Rachel. "Can't wait to see you tonight. James has no idea, right?" Eliza smiled and typed back a quick confirmation. She'd been planning this surprise for months. James thought they were having a quiet dinner, just the 2 of them. He had no idea 20 of their closest friends would be waiting in the private dining room. As she applied her makeup, another text came through, this time from James. "Meeting running long. Meet you at restaurant instead of home?" Eliza frowned at the message. That would ruin part of her surprise. She'd planned for them to arrive together with James blindfolded as they entered the private room. "Please try to make it home first," she replied. "I have something special planned." 3 dots appeared as he typed, then disappeared. Then a simple, "I'll try." The unease that had been hovering at the edges of her consciousness for weeks pressed a little closer. James had been distant lately, distracted. Always on his phone, always working late. She'd spotted him closing browser windows quickly when she entered his office at home. Once she'd heard him speaking in hushed tones on the phone, a conversation that ended abruptly when he noticed her. Normal marital challenges, she told herself. Every relationship had its ebbs and flows. They were just in a temporary ebb, focusing on careers and daily routines. Tonight would rekindle everything. Her phone rang. Rachel again. "Hey, is everything still on for tonight?" her friend asked, an odd hesitation in her voice. "Of course," Eliza replied, slipping into her dress, a sleek black number that James had always loved. "Why wouldn't it be?" A pause. "No, just confirming. I'll see you at 7. Something in Rachel's tone made Eliza pause, mascara wand halfway to her eye. "Is everything okay? You sound strange." "Everything's fine," Rachel answered too quickly. "I'm just excited for you guys. 10 years is a big deal." The call ended, and Eliza stared at her reflection. The woman who looked back at her was beautiful, successful, and loved. So why did she suddenly feel so uncertain? She shook off the feeling. Tonight would be perfect. Their marriage was perfect. The occasional doubts were just her imagination, her insecurity speaking. James loved her. He'd always loved her. At 6:30, Eliza's phone lit up with another text from James. "Heading to restaurant now. Sorry, couldn't make it home. See you there. Love you." She sighed but texted back a cheerful response. The surprise would still work. She'd just have to coordinate with the restaurant staff to delay him in the bar until she arrived. Slipping into her heels, Eliza took one last look around their immaculate home. Pictures of their life together adorned the walls, memories of trips and celebrations, moments of joy captured in frames. 10 years of building something beautiful together. Tonight would mark the beginning of 10 more. She refused to consider any other possibility. Eliza arrived at Luciel 30 minutes early, her heart fluttering with anticipation. She wanted to check that everything was perfect before James arrived. The champagne chilling, the friends hidden, the music ready. The maitre d' greeted her with a knowing smile. "Mrs. Caldwell, your guests are already in the private room. Would you like to join them before your husband arrives?" "Actually, has my husband arrived yet?" Eliza asked. "He texted that he was coming straight here." The maitre d' consulted his tablet. "I don't believe Mr. Caldwell has checked in yet, but I can escort you to the private room while you wait." "I'd like to surprise him when he arrives," Eliza said. "Maybe I could wait near the entrance." "Of course. I'll have someone alert you when he comes in." Eliza wandered toward the bar area, planning to have a quick glass of wine to calm her nerves. The restaurant was dimly lit, romantic alcoves designed for intimate conversations. She rounded the corner to the bar and froze. James was already there, but he wasn't alone. Her cousin Vanessa sat perched on a bar stool, leaning close to James. His hand rested on her thigh, fingers tracing small circles on the fabric of her dress. As Eliza watched, unable to move, James leaned forward and kissed Vanessa deeply, passionately, without a trace of guilt or hesitation. The room tilted. Eliza grabbed the wall for support, her purse slipping from her grasp and hitting the floor with a thud. The sound caught their attention, and both heads turned toward her. James's expression shifted from shock to resignation in an instant. Not guilt, not shame, resignation, as if he'd been caught in a minor inconvenience. "Eliza," he said, standing slowly, "you're early." Vanessa at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, sliding off the bar stool and smoothing her dress. Her cousin, her family. The betrayal was doubly sharp. "How long?" Eliza managed to ask, her voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside her. James glanced at Vanessa, some unspoken communication passing between them. "Let's discuss this privately." "How long?" Eliza repeated, louder this time. Several nearby diners turned to look. 2 years, he finally admitted. "But Eliza, it's not what you think." A laugh escaped her, high and unnatural. "It's exactly what I think. You're having an affair with my cousin, on our anniversary." The maitre d' approached, concern etched on his face. "Is everything all right here?" "Fine," James said smoothly. "We're just having a private discussion." "Everything is not fine," Eliza countered. "I have 20 friends waiting in a private room to surprise my husband for our anniversary, and I've just found him with his tongue down my cousin's throat." The restaurant staff member's eyes widened. "Perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere more private." They were escorted to a small office near the kitchen. Eliza's legs moved mechanically, her mind racing. 2 years. Half of their last 4 years together had been a lie. "Eliza, I was going to tell you," James began once the door closed behind them. "When?" she demanded. "After our anniversary dinner. Tomorrow? Next year?" "I didn't want to hurt you." Vanessa stood in the corner, silent, examining her manicured nails as if they were suddenly fascinating. "Everyone knows, don't they?" Eliza asked, a horrible realization dawning. "That's why Rachel sounded strange on the phone. All our friends know." James didn't deny it. "We've been discreet, but yes, some people are aware of our situation." "Our situation?" Eliza repeated. The words tasted like ash. "You mean your affair?" "It's more than an affair, Eliza," James said, his voice softening as he glanced at Vanessa. "We're in love." The words struck like physical blows. "In love," she echoed hollowly. "I never meant for this to happen," Vanessa finally spoke. "It just did. We tried to fight it." "Not very hard, apparently," Eliza snapped. James sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I was going to wait until after tonight, but since we're here now, I want a divorce, Eliza." The final blow. Eliza felt something shatter inside her, something fundamental and irreparable. "Vanessa is my soulmate," James continued, moving to stand beside her cousin. "I think, deep down, you've known for a while that something was wrong between us." Eliza stared at them, these two people she had trusted completely. "You expect me to believe this is about soulmates? That destroying our marriage, betraying family, lying to my face for years was some grand romance?" "I know it's hard to understand right now," James said patronizingly, "but someday you'll see this was for the best." A knock at the door interrupted them. The maitre d' peered in hesitantly. "Excuse me, Mrs. Caldwell, your guests are wondering about the delay." "Tell them the party is canceled," Eliza said flatly. "Tell them my husband has been sleeping with my cousin for 2 years, and everyone knew but me." The next 3 days passed in a blur of anguish and humiliation. Eliza moved through her home like a ghost, unable to eat, barely sleeping. James had not returned after the restaurant confrontation. Instead, he'd sent a text saying he was staying with Vanessa and would collect his things when Eliza was in a more reasonable state. Reasonable, as if her reaction to complete betrayal was somehow unreasonable. On the morning of the 3rd day, Eliza forced herself to shower and dress. She needed answers, clarity about what had happened to her life. She drove to their shared office building downtown where she managed the finances for James's real estate development company. The receptionist looked surprised to see her. "Mrs. Caldwell, we weren't expecting you today." "I need to check some files," Eliza said, moving past her toward the office she maintained down the hall from James's larger suite. Once inside, she locked the door and began systematically going through financial records. What she discovered made her physically ill. Over the past 18 months, James had been transferring funds from their joint accounts, including her inheritance from her grandmother, into offshore accounts she had no access to. Nearly $2 million gone. Not just her heart and her marriage, but her financial security as well. Her phone rang. Rachel's name flashed on the screen. Eliza had been ignoring calls from friends, but something compelled her to answer this one. "I'm so sorry, Eliza," Rachel began without preamble. "I wanted to tell you, but James said he would handle it. He made us all promise." "How long have you known?" Eliza asked, her voice flat. A pause. "About a year. It started at the company Christmas party when you had the flu. And no one thought I deserved to know my husband was sleeping with my cousin. He said it was just a fling at first. Then he said he was going to end it. Then he said he was waiting for the right time to tell you." Rachel's voice broke. "I should have told you anyway. I'm so sorry." Eliza ended the call without responding. Methodically, she began printing bank statements, transfers, everything that documented James's financial betrayal. If he wanted a divorce, she would make sure she wasn't left with nothing. Her office door burst open. James stood there, face flushed with anger. "What are you doing here?" Eliza held up a bank statement. "Finding out how thoroughly you've screwed me over." "Those are private company documents." "My name is on half of them," she countered. "My inheritance money is in these accounts, James. Money you had no right to move." "I was investing it," he said dismissively, "for our future." "What future?" "The one where you're with Vanessa and I'm left with nothing." James's expression hardened. "You're becoming hysterical. This is why I couldn't tell you sooner. I knew you'd overreact." "Overreact?" Eliza laughed bitterly. "You stole my money, cheated with my cousin, lied to me for years, and I'm overreacting." "I'm trying to be civil about this, Eliza. We can have a clean break. You keep the house, I keep the business. It's fair." "Fair?" She gestured to the documents. "You've been planning this for over a year. Draining accounts, setting up your new life with Vanessa. There's nothing fair about it." "You're making this ugly," James said, his handsome face twisting into something cold and unfamiliar. "I didn't want it to be ugly." "Then you shouldn't have made it cruel," Eliza replied, gathering the documents into her bag. "I'm taking these to my lawyer." James stepped forward, blocking her path. "I can't let you do that." For the first time, Eliza felt a flicker of fear beneath her anger. The man before her was a stranger, someone capable of calculated deception for years. What else was he capable of? "Move, James. You're not thinking clearly," he insisted. "You're upset, making rash decisions. Everyone will see that. No one will believe you." The truth of his words hit her like a slap. He had spent months, perhaps years, cultivating the narrative that she was emotionally unstable. Their friends already saw him as the reasonable one, the one who had tried to make it work. Eliza pushed past him and fled the office. She drove aimlessly, rain beginning to fall as the sky darkened. Her phone buzzed repeatedly, James's name appearing each time. She turned it off. The rain intensified, matching the storm inside her. How had she missed the signs? How had she failed to see the true nature of the man she married? The windshield wipers struggled against the downpour as she accelerated, just wanting to get away, to go somewhere, anywhere, that wasn't the life she'd thought was perfect. The curve in the road appeared suddenly through the rain. Eliza swerved, too late. The guardrail gave way, and for one suspended moment, she felt weightless. Her last conscious thought was not of fear, but of regret. "I wish I could do it all differently." Brightness filtered through Eliza's eyelids, pulling her from a deep sleep. She blinked, disoriented by the familiar yet unexpected surroundings. This was her old apartment, the one she'd lived in before buying the house with James, the small studio with the cracked ceiling paint and temperamental radiator. She sat up abruptly, heart racing. The car accident, the guardrail, the fall. She should be dead. "What the hell?" she whispered, looking down at her hands. They appeared younger, the beginning of age spots she'd noticed on her right hand completely gone. Her wedding ring was missing, too. Eliza stumbled to the bathroom, flipping on the harsh fluorescent light. The face that stared back at her from the mirror was undeniably hers, but younger. The fine lines around her eyes had disappeared. Her hair was shorter, styled the way she'd worn it 7 years ago. 7 years ago. Before James. Her phone chimed from the bedside table, an ancient iPhone model she hadn't owned in years. With trembling hands, she checked the date, March 24th, 2018. Exactly 7 years before her anniversary, 7 years before the night everything fell apart. "This isn't possible," she said to the empty apartment. "I'm dead or dreaming or in a coma." The phone chimed again. A text from Rachel. "Don't forget drinks tonight at the Edison. Kevin's friend from Chicago will be there. The cute real estate guy I told you about." Kevin's friend. The real estate guy. James. March 24th, 2018 was the night she met James. Eliza sat heavily on the edge of her bed, mind racing. If this was real, if she had somehow traveled back in time, then she knew everything that would happen over the next 7 years. Every choice, every mistake, every betrayal. To test her theory, she called Rachel. "Hey, what's up?" her friend answered. "Rachel, this is going to sound strange, but can you tell me what happened to you last weekend?" Eliza asked carefully. "You mean when I fell in that ridiculous pothole outside the grocery store and sprained my ankle? I told you that story already. I'm still limping, see?" There was a shuffling sound as Rachel presumably demonstrated her limp over the phone. Eliza hadn't been guessing. She remembered Rachel telling her about that incident 7 years ago. This was real. Somehow, impossibly real. "Sorry, I'm just distracted this morning," Eliza said. "About tonight, I'm not sure I'm up for it." "What, you have to come. I've been talking up this James guy for weeks. He's exactly your type, and Kevin says he's looking to settle down." The irony made Eliza want to laugh hysterically. James, looking to settle down. James, who would spend 2 years cheating on her with her cousin. James, who would drain her inheritance and gaslight her when she discovered his betrayal. "I'll think about it," she managed to say before ending the call. She spent the next few hours in a daze, moving around her apartment, touching familiar objects that had been sold or discarded years ago in her previous life. She tested her knowledge, writing down events she knew would happen in the coming weeks and months. The surprise snowstorm in April, the coffee shop on the corner closing unexpectedly, Rachel's promotion at work. By evening, Eliza had accepted the impossible. She had been given a second chance, an opportunity to live her life again, knowing what she knew now. The question was, what would she do with it? She could simply avoid meeting James tonight, change the trajectory of her life completely. But something inside her rebelled at the idea of running away. James had taken so much from her, not just material possessions, but her confidence, her trust, her sense of self. In the last timeline, she had died filled with regret and powerlessness. Not this time. Eliza opened her closet, surveying the clothes from her pre-James life. She selected a dress she knew would catch attention, not to attract James, but to remind herself of the woman she had been before he diminished her. Strong, independent, ambitious. As she applied her makeup, a plan began to form. She would meet James tonight. She would recognize every red flag she'd missed the first time. Most importantly, she would use this knowledge not just to protect herself, but to build the life she truly deserved on her own terms. This time, she would be the architect of her own fate, not its victim. She checked her reflection one final time before heading out. The woman who stared back at her was the same one who had woken up confused this morning, but something had changed in her eyes. A clarity, a purpose. "Phoenix rising," she whispered to herself, the words feeling right somehow. From the ashes of her former life, something new would emerge, something stronger. The Edison pulsed with energy when Eliza arrived, the Friday night crowd already in full swing. She spotted Rachel waving from a corner booth, surrounded by their regular group of friends, including Vanessa. Seeing her cousin sent a jolt through Eliza, memories of betrayal fresh despite happening in a future that no longer existed. Vanessa smiled warmly, patting the seat beside her. "You look amazing," Vanessa said. "That dress is killer." In her first life, Eliza had always been slightly intimidated by Vanessa, who seemed more sophisticated, more confident. Now, with 7 years of perspective, Eliza saw only a woman in her late 20s trying too hard to impress. "Thanks," Eliza replied, choosing a seat across the table instead. "How's the new job going?" Vanessa launched into a story about her marketing position, a job Eliza knew she would lose within 6 months for missing deadlines. Strange, how clearly she could see everyone's patterns now. "He's here," Rachel whispered excitedly, nudging Eliza. "The guy I told you about, by the bar with Kevin." Eliza turned, her heart stuttering despite her preparation. James looked exactly as she remembered from their first meeting. Tall, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit that set him apart from the casual Friday crowd. His smile flashed white as he laughed at something Kevin said. Handsome, charming, hollow. In her first life, she had been instantly smitten. Now she saw the calculated way he surveyed the room, the practiced charm, the carefully constructed image of success. All the signs of the skilled manipulator she now knew him to be. Kevin brought James to their table, making introductions. When he reached Eliza, James's smile widened, his interest obvious. "Eliza," he repeated, rolling her name on his tongue like he was tasting wine. "Kevin tells me you're in interior design." "I am," she confirmed. In her first life, she had been a junior designer at a corporate firm, still finding her footing. "I'm actually in the process of launching my own business." The words came out before she had fully formed the thought, but they felt right. In her first life, she had dreamed of starting her own firm, but put it off for years, partly due to James's subtle discouragement. "Really?" James raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. That's ambitious. Life's too short not to pursue what you want, Eliza replied, meeting his gaze steadily. The evening progressed much as she remembered, with one key difference. This time, Eliza watched James like a scientist observing a specimen. She noted how he positioned himself as the center of attention, how he dropped references to wealthy clients and exclusive properties, how his compliments were designed to make her feel simultaneously special and slightly insecure. "We should have dinner sometime," he suggested as the night wound down. "I'm developing a luxury condo project that could use a designer with your eye." In her first life, she had been flattered, excited by the professional opportunity as much as the romantic interest. This time, she recognized it for what it was, a hook designed to entangle her professionally and personally from the start. "I'd like to see the project," she said carefully. "My schedule's tight with the business launch, but I could fit in a lunch meeting next week." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly replaced by intrigue. James wasn't used to women who didn't immediately accommodate him. "Lunch it is." Over the next 2 months, Eliza executed her plan with precision. She launched her design business, starting small but targeting the high-end clients she knew from her previous life would be lucrative. She reconnected with a talented contractor she'd worked with before, securing his services before he became booked solid, as she knew he would by year's end. Most importantly, she maintained a professional relationship with James, allowing him to believe he was slowly winning her over while she studied him. Every conversation confirmed what she already knew. His business success was built partially on cutting corners and leveraging connections. His charm masked a profound self-interest. His pursuit of her was as much about what she could offer him professionally as it was about genuine attraction. "You're different," he told her over drinks one evening, 3 months after they'd met. "Most women are so eager to impress me, but you're focused on your own path." "Is that a problem?" she asked, sipping her wine. "No, it's refreshing, challenging." His smile held genuine interest now. "I like challenges." Eliza smiled back, thinking of the future that would never happen. "So do I." 6 months into their relationship, Eliza sat across from James at an upscale restaurant, watching him charm the waiter with practiced ease. In her previous life, she had been deeply in love by this point, blinded by his attention and generosity. Now she saw each gift, each romantic gesture for what it was, a calculated investment with expected returns. "I have news," James announced after ordering an expensive bottle of wine. "The Hamilton property finally closed. $20 million deal, biggest of my career so far." "Congratulations," Eliza said sincerely. The Hamilton deal had been legitimate, one of James's actual successes before he started cutting corners and making questionable decisions. "That's impressive." "I couldn't have done it without your redesign of the model unit," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "Hamilton said your work was what sealed the deal." Eliza allowed herself a moment of professional pride. Her business was growing faster than it had in her previous life, partly because she knew which opportunities to pursue and which to avoid. The Hamilton project had given her valuable exposure to other developers. "We make a good team," James continued, his expression growing serious. "Which brings me to something I've been thinking about." Eliza tensed. In her previous life, this dinner had been when James first suggested they move in together, the first step toward their eventual marriage. "I'm expanding the company," he said, "opening a luxury residential division. I want you to head the design department." This was new. In her previous life, he had never offered her a formal position in his company, preferring to use her talents on a project basis while keeping her professionally dependent on his referrals. "That's quite an offer," she replied carefully, "but I've been building my own brand, my own client base." "You could do both," he insisted, leaning forward. "Use my company's resources and connections to grow faster than you could alone. We'd be partners in every sense." The offer was tempting, even knowing what she knew. It would give her access to projects and clients that had taken years to develop in her previous life, but it would also tie her to James professionally, making any personal separation more complicated. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "It's a big decision." A flash of frustration crossed James's face before his smooth mask returned. "Of course. Take your time." Later that evening, at her apartment, James became more insistent. "Moving in together would make sense, too," he suggested, wrapping his arms around her waist. "We spend most nights together anyway, and your lease is up next month." Eliza extricated herself gently. "James, you know I value my independence. My business is at a critical growth stage, and I need to focus." "I'm trying to help your business," he countered, a slight edge to his voice. "Most women would be grateful for the opportunity I'm offering." There it was, the first real glimpse of the manipulation that had been so effective in her previous life, the subtle comparison to most women designed to make her question her own judgment. "I'm not most women," Eliza replied evenly, "and while I appreciate the offer, I need to make decisions based on what's best for my long-term goals, not just short-term convenience." James studied her, clearly reassessing his approach. "You're right," he said finally, his charm returning. "It's one of the things I admire about you, your focus." The next morning, after James left for an early meeting, Eliza opened her laptop and began a document titled James Caldwell. In it, she meticulously recorded their conversation from the previous night, noting the manipulation tactics, the attempt to create professional dependency, the subtle pressure to move in together. She had been keeping this record since their first meeting, a detailed account of every red flag, every inconsistency, every manipulative comment. Insurance, she told herself. Protection against gaslighting if things progressed as they had before. Over the following weeks, Eliza maintained a delicate balance, allowing James to believe she was considering his offer while subtly establishing boundaries. She introduced him to Vanessa at a group dinner, watching carefully as they interacted. The chemistry that had developed in her previous life wasn't evident yet, but she noted how James's attention lingered on her cousin slightly longer than necessary. "Your cousin seems nice," James commented casually as they drove home. "A bit dramatic, though." "Vanessa has always been expressive," Eliza replied neutrally. "We've been close since childhood." The irony of the statement wasn't lost on her. In this timeline, she would ensure their relationship took a very different path. 6 months into their relationship, Eliza sat across from James at an upscale restaurant, watching him charm the waiter with practiced ease. In her previous life, she had been deeply in love by this point, blinded by his attention and generosity. Now she saw each gift, each romantic gesture for what it was, a calculated investment with expected returns. "I have news," James announced after ordering an expensive bottle of wine. "The Hamilton property finally closed. $20 million deal. Biggest of my career so far." "Congratulations," Eliza said sincerely. The Hamilton deal had been legitimate, one of James's actual successes before he started cutting corners and making questionable decisions. "That's impressive." "I couldn't have done it without your redesign of the model unit," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "Hamilton said your work was what sealed the deal." Eliza allowed herself a moment of professional pride. Her business was growing faster than it had in her previous life, partly because she knew which opportunities to pursue and which to avoid. The Hamilton project had given her valuable exposure to other developers. "We make a good team," James continued, his expression growing serious, "which brings me to something I've been thinking about." Eliza tensed. In her previous life, this dinner had been when James first suggested they move in together, the first step toward their eventual marriage. "I'm expanding the company," he said, "opening a luxury residential division. I want you to head the design department." This was new. In her previous life, he had never offered her a formal position in his company, preferring to use her talents on a project basis while keeping her professionally dependent on his referrals. "That's quite an offer," she replied carefully. "But I've been building my own brand, my own client base." "You could do both," he insisted, leaning forward. "Use my company's resources and connections to grow faster than you could alone. We'd be partners in every sense." The offer was tempting, even knowing what she knew. It would give her access to projects and clients that had taken years to develop in her previous life. But it would also tie her to James professionally, making any personal separation more complicated. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "It's a big decision." A flash of frustration crossed James's face before his smooth mask returned. "Of course. Take your time." Later that evening at her apartment, James became more insistent. "Moving in together would make sense too," he suggested, wrapping his arms around her waist. "We spend most nights together anyway, and your lease is up next month." Eliza extricated herself gently. "James, you know I value my independence. My business is at a critical growth stage, and I need to focus." "I'm trying to help your business," he countered, a slight edge to his voice. "Most women would be grateful for the opportunity I'm offering." There it was, the first real glimpse of the manipulation that had been so effective in her previous life. The subtle comparison to most women designed to make her question her own judgment. "I'm not most women," Eliza replied evenly, "and while I appreciate the offer, I need to make decisions based on what's best for my long-term goals, not just short-term convenience." James studied her, clearly reassessing his approach. "You're right," he said finally, his charm returning. "It's one of the things I admire about you, your focus." The next morning, after James left for an early meeting, Eliza opened her laptop and began a document titled James Caldwell. In it, she meticulously recorded their conversation from the previous night, noting the manipulation tactics, the attempt to create professional dependency, the subtle pressure to move in together. She had been keeping this record since their first meeting, a detailed account of every red flag, every inconsistency, every manipulative comment. Insurance, she told herself. Protection against gaslighting if things progressed as they had before. Over the following weeks, Eliza maintained a delicate balance, allowing James to believe she was considering his offer while subtly establishing boundaries. She introduced him to Vanessa at a group dinner, watching carefully as they interacted. The chemistry that had developed in her previous life wasn't evident yet, but she noted how James's attention lingered on her cousin, slightly longer than necessary. "Your cousin seems nice," James commented casually as they drove home. "A bit dramatic, though." "Vanessa has always been expressive," Eliza replied neutrally. "We've been close since childhood." The irony of the statement wasn't lost on her. In this timeline, she would ensure their relationship took a very different path. 9 months into their relationship, well ahead of the timeline from her previous life, James proposed. They were at the rooftop restaurant of his newest development project. The city lights spread beneath them like fallen stars. "Eliza," he said, dropping to one knee and producing a diamond ring that was larger, more ostentatious than the one from her first life. "You're unlike any woman I've ever known. You challenge me, inspire me, make me better. Will you marry me?" In her first life, she had cried with joy, overwhelmed by the romance of it all. This time, she saw the calculation behind the gesture, the ring designed to impress their social circle, the location chosen to remind her of his success, the timing strategic, meant to secure her before she grew too independent. Her hesitation was genuine, though for entirely different reasons than James might suspect. "This is unexpected," she said, which was true. In her previous life, the proposal had come after 18 months, not 9. "I know what I want," James replied, still kneeling, "and it's you, United States, building something extraordinary together." Eliza considered her options carefully. Refusing outright would end the relationship, cutting off her ability to protect herself and others from what she knew James was capable of. Accepting without conditions would set her on the same path as before. "Yes," she said finally, "but with one condition. I want a long engagement, at least a year. My business is at a critical stage, and planning a wedding would be too distracting right now. Relief and triumph flashed across James's face as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "Whatever you want," he agreed easily. "The important thing is that you said yes." Later that night, as James slept beside her, Eliza added to her James Caldwell document. "Early proposal," she wrote. "Intended to secure relationship before I become fully independent professionally. Agreed to request for long engagement too quickly, suggesting the timing of marriage is less important than the commitment itself." The next day, they announced their engagement to friends over dinner. Rachel squealed with excitement, while Vanessa offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let me see the ring," Vanessa insisted, grabbing Eliza's hand. "Wow, James, you didn't hold back." "Only the best for Eliza," he replied smoothly, his hand possessive on Eliza's waist. Over the following weeks, James began showing his true colors more frequently. He questioned Eliza's business decisions, suggesting changes that would benefit his projects but potentially hurt her brand. He insisted on joint financial planning, subtly directing conversations toward combining resources. "We should think about putting your inheritance into the Westlake project," he suggested one evening. "It would give you equity in a major development, the same inheritance he would later drain in her previous life." "I'm keeping my inheritance separate," Eliza said firmly. "My grandmother intended it for my business." James frowned. "That's not very trusting. We're going to be married." "It's not about trust. It's about honoring her wishes," Eliza countered. "My business is my priority right now." "I thought I was your priority," James said, his voice cooling. "A healthy relationship has room for individual priorities," Eliza replied, watching his reaction carefully. The mask slipped for just a moment, revealing irritation before smoothing into understanding. "You're right. I just get excited about our future together." Meanwhile, Eliza's business flourished. She secured a major contract with a hotel chain that had sought her out after seeing her work on the Hamilton project. Her client list expanded, and she hired 2 junior designers to handle the growing workload. James took credit for her success in subtle ways when they were with friends. "I introduced her to the right people," he would say, or "we make such a good team professionally." Eliza let these comments slide, focused on her long game. The more successful she became independently, the more frustrated James grew. He began suggesting she scale back her work hours, take fewer new clients, focus more on their relationship. "You're working too hard," he said after she declined a weekend away because of a project deadline. "It's not healthy." "This project is important," she replied. "The client is well connected in circles even you haven't reached yet, James." The implied challenge to his status rankled him visibly. "Fine. I'll go to the lake house alone. Maybe I'll invite some friends instead." He didn't need to specify which friends. The subtle threat was clear, though Eliza doubted he had begun pursuing Vanessa yet. In her first life, that affair had started after they were married. Eliza smiled calmly. "Enjoy your weekend. I'll see you when you get back." Each small act of independence was a victory, a rewriting of the story that had ended so tragically before. Each boundary established was a brick in the foundation of the life she was determined to build, this time on her own terms. 6 months into their engagement, Eliza's design firm had expanded to a team of 5, with projects spanning 3 states. The long engagement she had insisted upon was proving strategically valuable, allowing her to cement her professional independence while observing James's increasingly problematic behavior. "We need to set a date," James insisted over dinner at his penthouse apartment. "People are starting to ask questions." "What people?" Eliza asked mildly, taking a sip of her wine. "My investors, my family." He leaned forward, his handsome face serious. "It looks strange, Eliza. A year-long engagement with no wedding plans." "I thought we agreed to focus on our careers first," she reminded him. "Your Westlake project is behind schedule, and I'm in the middle of the hotel chain rollout." James frowned. My business is stable enough, and yours is becoming a problem. A problem? You're never available anymore, always working late, always traveling to job sites. We barely see each other. His tone softened, becoming cajoling. I miss you. I want to start our life together. In her previous life, this manipulative concern had worked. She had scaled back her career, prioritized his, all to prove her commitment. Not this time. We can set a date for next spring, she conceded, watching his expression carefully. That gives us 6 months to plan and will align with the completion of both our major projects. Relief flashed across his face, quickly replaced by calculation. Spring is perfect. My mother will be thrilled. Later that week, Eliza met Vanessa for lunch, something she had deliberately avoided in her previous life, as James had subtly poisoned their relationship. So, a spring wedding, Vanessa said, stirring her iced tea. James must be relieved. He was complaining to Kevin that you keep pushing it off. Eliza raised an eyebrow. He talks to Kevin about our relationship. Vanessa looked uncomfortable. Just guy talk, I think. Kevin mentioned it when we ran into each other at the gym. Another red flag for Eliza's document. James discussing private relationship matters with friends, positioning himself as the reasonable party. How are things with you? Eliza asked, changing the subject. Still enjoying the marketing job? Vanessa sighed. It's stressful. My boss is impossible to please, and I'm always worried about missing deadlines. In her previous life, Vanessa had been fired from this job, creating a vulnerability that James had exploited. Eliza made a quick decision. My hotel client is looking for a marketing coordinator for their property launches, someone to work with my design team on brand consistency. It might be a good fit for you. Vanessa's eyes widened. Are you serious? That sounds perfect. I can recommend you if you're interested. 2 weeks later, Vanessa started her new job, working closely with Eliza's team but mostly remotely, minimizing her potential contact with James. Another variable changed in the equation of their lives. Meanwhile, James's business began showing the same troubling signs Eliza remembered from before. The Westlake project fell further behind schedule. Investors became nervous. James's risk-taking increased. I need to leverage some additional properties, he told Eliza one evening, just temporarily to keep Westlake moving forward. Which properties? She asked, already knowing the answer. The downtown office building, the riverside condos, he hesitated, and I was hoping you might consider using your grandmother's property as additional collateral. The inheritance property, the first step in his financial betrayal. That's not possible, Eliza said firmly. That property is tied to my business holdings. James's expression hardened. This is exactly what I've been talking about, Eliza. The lack of trust. We're supposed to be partners, but you keep your assets separate, your business separate, even your time separate. I'm building something important to me, she replied calmly, just as you are. It feels like you're preparing for us to fail. His voice rose slightly, like you're expecting the worst. The irony was almost painful. I'm preparing for success, James. My success, your success, our success. But I won't risk my business for your project. He stormed out that night, not returning until the following afternoon. Eliza noted the pattern in her document. First attempts at financial entanglement, emotional manipulation when refused, withdrawal as punishment. When he returned, he was contrite, bearing flowers and apologies. You were right, he said. I shouldn't have asked. I found another solution anyway. Eliza knew what that solution likely involved, the beginning of the financial shell game that would eventually lead to his downfall. But this time, she wouldn't be caught in the collapse. I'm glad, she said simply. Now, about the wedding venue. I think I've found the perfect place. The day that mirrored Eliza's anniversary from her previous life arrived with perfect spring weather, exactly what would have been their 10th anniversary. But in this timeline, it was the night of their engagement renewal party, James's idea to celebrate the upcoming wedding and reassure his increasingly nervous investors. "Everything looks amazing," Rachel said, helping Eliza with her earrings in the private room at Luciel, the same restaurant where her life had shattered before. "You seem calm. I was a nervous wreck before my wedding." "I've had a lot of time to prepare," Eliza replied, a slight smile playing at her lips. The past month had been particularly illuminating. As James's financial problems grew more severe, his behavior became increasingly erratic. Late nights at the office, secretive phone calls, a growing irritability when Eliza asked questions about the wedding costs or their future plans. Eliza had been meticulously documenting everything, adding to her file. She had also been quietly consulting with a financial analyst, having them review the publicly available information on James's projects. The results confirmed what she already knew. The Westlake development was significantly over-leveraged, with investor funds being used in questionable ways. Most tellingly, James had begun spending more time with Vanessa, ostensibly discussing marketing strategies for his properties. But Eliza had seen the text messages he forgot to delete, the coffee meetings that ran suspiciously long, history repeating itself right on schedule. "Is Vanessa coming tonight?" Rachel asked, as if reading her thoughts. "She should be here already," Eliza said. "She was helping with the final arrangements." When they emerged into the main restaurant, the private room was beautifully decorated, filled with flowers and soft lighting. James stood at the center, looking handsome and confident, though Eliza noted the tightness around his eyes, the slightly too firm grip on his champagne glass. "There she is," he called out, moving toward Eliza with his arms open. "My beautiful fiancée." The guests applauded, investors and friends mingling together. Vanessa stood slightly apart, watching them with an expression Eliza recognized all too well. "You look lovely," James whispered in Eliza's ear, kissing her cheek. "This night is important. The Dixon investors are here and they're wavering on the Westlake financing." Of course. The party wasn't about celebrating their love. It was a business maneuver, a show of stability and success to secure more funding. "I'll be charming," Eliza promised, squeezing his arm before moving to greet guests. For the next hour, she played her role perfectly. The adoring fiancée, the successful businesswoman, the perfect complement to James's ambitions. She watched him work the room, noted how his attention repeatedly returned to Vanessa, who looked stunning in a dress that seemed oddly familiar. It was the dress Vanessa had worn to the restaurant in Eliza's previous life. The night everything fell apart. When James clinked his glass for attention, Eliza knew what was coming. The renewal of their engagement had been his idea, a public recommitment before their wedding. In reality, it was a performance for his investors, a display of stability during a time when his business was anything but stable. "I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight," James began, his voice carrying across the room. "1 year ago, I asked this incredible woman to be my wife, and somehow, she said yes." Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. "Tonight, I want to renew that promise," he continued, moving to Eliza's side and taking her hand, "to publicly declare what she means to me, what our future together means." Eliza felt a strange sense of calm as she reached into her clutch with her free hand, extracting a small USB drive. "Before you continue, James," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I'd like to say something as well." He looked surprised but pleased, clearly thinking she was embracing the moment, playing along with his performance. "Of course, darling," he said, stepping back with a magnanimous gesture. Eliza turned to face their guests. "James is right. Tonight is about honesty and commitment, so I want to be completely honest with all of you." She held up the USB drive. On this drive is a comprehensive file documenting James's financial mismanagement of the Westlake project, including misappropriation of investor funds, falsified progress reports, and most recently his attempts to use my assets as collateral without my full knowledge. The room went utterly silent. James's face transformed from confusion to shock to fury in seconds. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "The same thing you're doing," Eliza replied calmly. "Being strategic." She turned back to the guests, many of whom were investors now frozen in alarm. "I'm not sharing this to cause harm, but to prevent it. I've already provided copies to the relevant authorities who I expect will be contacting many of you soon." James grabbed her arm. "You've lost your mind. These are private business matters." "No, they're not. Not when they involve fraud." Eliza gently extracted herself from his grip. "And not when they involve betrayal on multiple levels." She looked directly at Vanessa, who had gone pale. "Including personal betrayal." The room erupted into chaos. Investors demanded explanations, friends looked on in shock, and James frantically tried to regain control of the situation. "She's confused," he insisted, his charming smile now strained as he addressed the crowd. "Business disagreements sometimes spill over into personal life. I'm sure we can discuss this privately, darling." Eliza remained perfectly calm. "I'm not confused, James. I'm finally seeing everything clearly." She turned to face him directly, removing the enormous engagement ring and placing it in his palm. "In my last life, I died waiting for a man to complete me. In this one, I've already made myself whole." James blinked, genuine confusion breaking through his panic. "What are you talking about? What last life?" "It doesn't matter," Eliza said softly. "What matters is that I know you, James, the real you, the man who would have eventually drained my inheritance, isolated me from friends and family, and cheated with my cousin while gaslighting me into thinking I was crazy for suspecting anything." James glanced nervously at Vanessa, who looked away guiltily. "You two haven't gone that far yet," Eliza continued, "but the texts, the secret meetings, they tell me everything I need to know about where this was heading." "You went through my phone?" James hissed. "I didn't need to. You left it unlocked on the counter last week. I saw the notifications." Eliza addressed the stunned guests. "I apologize for the dramatic evening. This isn't what any of you expected, I'm sure. But sometimes the truth needs to be witnessed." She picked up her clutch and moved toward the exit, pausing beside a shell-shocked Vanessa. "He would have done the same to you eventually. I saved you from that, at least." Rachel hurried after Eliza, catching her at the door. "How long have you known about all this?" Eliza smiled sadly. "Longer than you'd believe. I needed to be certain, to have everything documented before I acted." "What will you do now?" Rachel asked. "Live my life. My real life." Eliza hugged her friend briefly. "I'll call you tomorrow." Outside, the spring night was cool and clear. Eliza took a deep breath, feeling lighter than she had in either of her lifetimes. Behind her, she could hear James's voice rising as he tried to salvage his reputation, his investments, his carefully constructed facade. None of it was her concern anymore. 1 year later, Eliza stood in her design studio, surveying the wall of awards and press clippings. Her firm had thrived in the aftermath of the engagement party revelation. While James faced investigations and the collapse of his business empire, Eliza's reputation for integrity had only enhanced her professional standing. The phoenix tattoo on her wrist caught the afternoon light as she reached for her ringing phone. "Eliza Bennett Designs," she answered. "Ms. Bennett, this is Claude Renard from the Viceroy Hotel Group in Paris. We've been impressed with your work on the American properties and would like to discuss expanding our partnership to our European locations." "I'd be delighted to discuss that, Mr. Renard. When would you like to meet?" After arranging the meeting, Eliza gazed out at the city skyline. Her assistant knocked lightly on the door. "Your car is ready whenever you are." "Thank you, Sarah. I'll be down in 5 minutes." She gathered her things, pausing to check her calendar for the week ahead. Full, but manageable. A life built on her terms, her talents, her truth. As she waited for the elevator, a familiar figure emerged from the building's upscale restaurant. James looking considerably less polished than he once had. His legal troubles had been resolved with a settlement that left him financially diminished but not imprisoned. Their eyes met briefly before he looked away, a flash of something like shame crossing his face. Eliza felt a momentary pang of compassion, not regret but acknowledgement of what might have been in another life if he had been different, if she had been different. "Hold the elevator, please," she called as the doors began to close. A stranger obliged, smiling as she stepped inside. "Thank you," Eliza said. "My pleasure," the man replied, his voice warm. "Heading down?" "Yes," Eliza said, "and then Paris, apparently. Business or pleasure?" She smiled, feeling the possibilities of this new, self-created life expanding before her. Both, I hope, definitely both. As the elevator descended, Eliza thought about the strange journey that had brought her here, the death and rebirth, the second chance she had never expected. She had used it not for revenge, but for reclamation. Not to destroy James, but to save herself. The phoenix rising from the ashes of her former life had transformed into something magnificent and untouchable. Not because she had avoided pain or hardship, but because she had faced it with open eyes and refused to be defined by it. The elevator reached the ground floor, doors opening to the bright afternoon. "After you," the stranger said. Eliza stepped out into the sunshine, ready for whatever came next.